Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so excited you're able to join us today. My name is Danielle Forget Shield. I am a 1994 engineering school graduate of Washington University and a member of the Alumni Board of Governors. I currently live in Houston, Texas, and in the spirit of today's talk, I have had a career full of unexpected starts and stops. I've taken 3 voluntary severance packages over my career, had 3 children, and in the midst of all of it, had a great engineering career and then jumped into being an entrepreneur. And so after I've had a training company and I owned a medical waste company that I recently sold and manage our rental property. And then I currently have an ice cream food truck here in Houston called Museum Ice Cream. Been doing that for 5 years, and it is fabulous fun and a great way to be able to be an entrepreneur and also spend a lot of time with my children who work as some of my employees on the truck. So a little bit about me, but let's move on to today's exciting presentation. On behalf of the Washington University Alumni Association, I'm really excited to welcome the alumni, parents, and friends to Return to Work and Thrive, how to re-enter paid work after a career pause. Before we begin, let's just go over the format for today's session. You will only hear and see me and our presenter. The webinar will last about 1 hour. Following the presentation and discussion, we will have plenty of time for questions. We encourage you to participate by asking questions at any time using the Q&A function. Thank you to everyone who has already submitted questions with their registration. We got a lot of fabulous questions. So during the Q&A, we'll start with a couple of those, and then we're going to get through as many questions as we can. The webinar today is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Alumni Association YouTube channel following the event. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce you and to welcome Anna McKay. So Anna graduated from Washington University in 2000. She received a master's in accounting from the University of Georgia in 2001 and spent the first 10 years of her career working in public accounting for Deloitte. After a decade in the corporate world, Anna became an ICF certified coach and began her coaching journey in 2008, helping other people find careers they connected with and could excel at. She moved to the Philippines and to China on expat assignments with her husband and decided to focus on being a mom while coaching on the side before moving to Houston in 2013. Over those years, she met many other parents, mostly women, who were transitioning from high-powered careers to expat spouses and or mothers. And after opting out of the workforce to devote time to their children, many of these women were ready to get back to paid work, but found that they felt lost and isolated and didn't really know where to start. So Anna started Parents Pivot to help parents find careers they love after a career pause. Through one-on-one coaching, workshops on resumes, LinkedIn, and salary negotiation, return to work programs, placement services, and onboarding coaching, Parents Pivot helps parents tackle their fears and anxieties and position themselves for the current job market. I recently was talking with some other alumni in Houston, and I couldn't believe that I had never met Anna before through all the connections that we share. And I have heard such amazing things about her, and I am very excited. So please join me in welcoming Anna McKay.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Danielle. I know it's so funny that we haven't met, but hopefully, and we did actually get a chance to see each other in person at your museum truck. So that was awesome. Hopefully I'll be coming by for ice cream a lot more often in the future, in the coming months. So thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to talk with you guys today about returning to work and thriving. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Here we go. So So yes, so I have had a varied career. As Danielle so kindly mentioned, I have been an expat twice and then moved to Houston about 7, 8 years ago. And throughout that time, met so many people who had taken a career pause, whether that was to move overseas or to care for young children. And then when they wanted to return, found it really difficult. And so I have a heart for helping returners get back to paid work, and it's work that I love to do. So I'm honored to be here today to talk to you guys about it and share some tips, some things I've seen as common struggles with clients over the years, and some tips for overcoming, and share some success stories with you guys today. So we've already gone over my bio a little bit. Parents Pivot is a company that I founded a couple of years ago to specifically support returners and parents in transition. So I know over the past year, we've all experienced several Zoom calls, and I always like to do this to just kind of check in with yourself, check in with ourselves to see where we are, how we want to show up today, how we want to choose to be engaged, how we want to show up. So if you will, I'm going to have this be an interactive session through the chat. So if you guys can, if you can in the chat share, how engaged do you plan to be during this call? So on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 7, 1 being the least, 7 being the most, how engaged do you plan to be on this call? And it's no judgment. This is up to you. This is your choice. So I'm going to see if I can find the chat here. Yep. Okay. Awesome. Somebody's driving. That's awesome. So 1, please focus on driving and stay safe. I love it. We see some 4s and 6s. Yeah. Okay. 5s, 4s. Yeah. 8, 7. Oh, an 8. Oh my goodness. I love it. I love it. So you've got a lot of 5s, some 2s and 3s. We got people all over the place. So I know there are people from all over the place and people in an all over the place kind of headspace. So this is for you. Show up and get the most out of it that you can. So the next question is, how much risk are you willing to take? And so this, I do want to remind you all that this is a recorded call. So I don't want anybody to share anything that they're not comfortable sharing with, but more internally for you, like how much risk are you willing to take in exploring for yourself what a return could look like, what a successful return could look like, what's holding you back, what you may be doing that's holding you back. So in terms of risk, how much risk are you willing to take today? Oh, we got a 5.5. Nice. 7s, 5s and 7s. I love it. 2 and 3. Yeah, good. That's honest. I love it. Yeah, some 4s and 5s, some middle range, some really willing to take the risk. So good. Yeah, I love it. I love it. It seems like most people are on the mid to high range. So good. Because, the more that we put out there for ourselves, and I'm not necessarily talking about publicly, but the more we're willing to kind of take on that risk ourselves, the greater benefit we'll get out of this kind of growth experience. So, all right. So the next one, and then how much do you care about the experience of others on this call? So on a scale of 1 to 7, yeah, it looks like we're in a group participation environment here. So love it. I love to see the 6s and 7s. That's awesome. Good. Yeah. So we're in a shared community at this moment. So we're all here together. We're all here to be supportive, and I'm here to help you with tips and some and to share some struggles. And so hopefully all of this will be helpful for you, and you guys will participate and get the most out of this experience. So awesome. Good. Thank you. All right, so moving on to the next slide. This is our agenda for today. We'll talk a little bit about the landscape for returning to paid work. We'll talk a little bit about some pre-pandemic numbers, some post-pandemic numbers. some common struggles that returners face and some tips for overcoming those struggles. And I'll share some client success stories. So some people that I've worked with in the past year during the pandemic who've landed in paid work. I'm going to share some of their stories too. And then we'll open it up to Q&A, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to ask. I'd love to hear your questions. All right. Next. So poll, I am wondering if the polls are working. If they are not, let's see, can we bring up the poll? Yeah. All right. Awesome. So if you are, and it looks like probably we have to answer these two questions at the same time. So we'll go ahead and do that. But if you are, where are you in your returning to paid work journey? So if you guys can take a couple of minutes to go through and pick out these, where are you in your return to work journey? And then, which struggle do you identify with? And the struggle piece, like, select what resonates with you. So you can select more than one, but where are you in your return to work journey? Are you a year out from paid work? Are you 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10, more than 10 years? You're not necessarily returning, but you want to make a career transition, or none of those, and you are here to support returners. So which one of those? And then the struggle that you identify with. So these are some of the struggles that we're going to go through. So go just scroll through those, take a look, and see what resonates with you. All right. And then I think we'll go ahead and close the poll. Hopefully people have had an opportunity to vote at this point. Nice. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'd love to see this. So it looks like most people are returning to work after more than 10 years. So that's 28%. The next group is returning to work between 1 and 5 years. The next, that's at 20%. And then we've got returning to work between 5 and 10 at 17%. It looks like the majority of you guys are returning to paid work. And then we've got some wonderful supporters in the call and some people making a career transition. So I know you'll all get something out of this today. So, and then in terms of which struggle, let's see. So it looks like a lack of clarity around what you want to do seems to be the biggest struggle. But there's also concern about the hiring bias, and then lack of confidence and overwhelmed by the job search process. So yeah, all of these. Great. Well, thank you so much. So let's get started with the presentation. So today you'll hear me talk about returners. And when I'm talking about returners, you can be a returner if you have a career pause for a variety of reasons. So many of the clients that I work with have a career pause for caring for young children, but they also have a career pause because maybe they've made a move, whether it's been international or local. They may have a career pause for caring for aging parents, for caring for their own health needs, for caring for a loved one. So a returner is anybody with a career pause looking to return to paid work. So we're going to go through in the next couple of slides some data on working mothers, because that's a lot of the data that's out there, and that's kind of focused on stay-at-home moms returning to work. But the tips and struggles and what we'll talk about today in the presentation relate to most returners. So we'll walk through some pre-pandemic career pause data, and then we'll talk about the pandemic's impact on mothers leaving the workforce. And then we'll talk about how mothers are behind their peers in returning to paid work in today's climate. And that returning to work is difficult, but it's also possible. And so hiring has been really picking up in the end of March and April, and I want to make sure everybody is ready for that. So I'm glad you're here for this presentation. That's step one. All right. So let's see here. So pre-pandemic data. So before the pandemic, there was data showing that 43% of highly skilled master's educated women took a career pause at some point in their life. And that 90% of them were eager to return. And so there's also data showing that millennial parents are taking career pauses more so than Gen X and previous generations. And at any any given time, there were 3 million women nationwide pre-pandemic who were looking to return to paid work. The pandemic increased the number of mothers leaving the workforce. I'm sure you all, if you're not living through this, you know and have read the statistics showing that that mothers have left the workforce in the past year. And we all know so many of the reasons and are living so many of the reasons why that is. But it's a huge number. It's a huge number, and people are talking about it. But I want to make sure that we're doing something to help get these women back into the workforce after, as we start to rebuild the economy, as we are hopefully moving through this pandemic. So I want to figure out what we're going to do about this, and I want to be part of that solution with Parents Pivot. So I want to help you return to paid work if that's where you are. All right. And then here is some data on mothers being behind their peers returning to paid work. So when we take a look at where mothers are, they're below fathers and non-parents in terms of returning to paid work. More data show that there's also Black and Hispanic mothers have been most impacted and are not back to work as compared to white women. And then there's also unconscious and conscious bias against stay-at-home mothers returning to work. So there was a study done pre-pandemic that showed that stay-at-home mothers were half as likely to be called back for an interview compared to mothers who had been out of paid work and laid off for the same amount of time. So, and then that amount of time was 18 months. So to me, that is shocking that two women that are presumably out of paid work for the same amount of time, one's a stay-at-home mother, one has been laid off, and the stay-at-home mother is half as likely to get called back. And then compared to mothers who are continuously working, stay-at-home mothers were a third as likely to get called back. There is that bias, that unconscious bias, that conscious bias against mothers. And so we'll talk about how to address some of that. So for the agenda, we've gone through the landscape for returning to paid work, and now let's get to some of those common struggles that returners face and how to overcome. So these are the common struggles, and you've taken the poll and you have identified which ones are resonating for you. And it seemed like that lack of clarity around what you want to do when you return to paid work was the highest one. There was also that bias question, and then a lack of confidence, feeling overwhelmed by the job search, and feeling isolated and alone in this process. So, and these are struggles that my clients face all the time and that we work through in coaching. So let's talk about the first one, where if you're worried about the hiring bias around your gap in paid work experience. So the first step in addressing bias is, we can only control ourselves and what we do. We cannot necessarily control external factors like companies and opinions, but if we understand that these biases are out there, then we can address them in a beneficial way to us. So we need to understand what those biases are. And the biases tend to be around a perceived lack of commitment and a perceived lack of skills. And I know these to be false biases against return to work clients, just given the experience that I've had working with returners. Most of my returners, when they're ready to get back to paid work, are doubly committed to an employer. They want to do a really good job. And so it's all about understanding that bias and then conveying your commitment to return to an employer in a way that an employer can hear and understand. A perceived lack of skills. I know so many of my clients are updating their skills, and there's so many ways to do that through certifications and short programs, some longer programs. So, there's ways to address that as well. And so if you can kind of knock out those 2 points for an employer, then then you've made it a long way towards chipping away at their bias. So I always encourage my clients to talk about their career pause and to talk about your story, own your story, and relate it to the job that you want to do. So I always coach clients to focus on the 3 C's when we're talking about commitment, competence, and cultural fit. Those are the 3 things that employers are concerned about when they're looking and making hiring decisions. So are you committed? Are you competent? Is there a cultural fit? So for you, think through how you can personally demonstrate each of those. All right, the next common struggle that we will address is a lack of confidence in your skills. So I come up with, this is such a common thing that returners face, that I've come up with a way to express some of the common value points that I see returners bring. And it's helpful for returners to really connect in with these individually and personally. And then it's helpful for companies and employers to realize that, wow, you're right. Returners that I've worked with, or I know people who are looking to return to paid work, and you're right, those qualities are right there. So don't look at this time away from paid work as a detriment. In many ways, this can be really valuable. So in terms of the acronym that I've come up with, it's depth. So I say returners and people who are pivoting careers have depth. So D stands for drive and determination. Many of the people that I work with, in whether it's a volunteer role or a paid position, show such drive and determination, such commitment to working through completing tasks, and demonstrating that you have that skill and that ability will answer that commitment question for an employer, and it shows it's a valuable skill to have in an employee. The next is energy. So if you've been out of paid work for a period of time, you're eager to get back, you bring a fresh energy that people who have been continuously working may not have. So you bring that fresh energy into a team, you can kind of liven up the team, and just with your kind of fresh, excited energy to be back in paid work. The next is prior professional experience. And so many of the clients that I work with have prior professional experience. It may be 3 years ago, it may be 18 years ago, but you've got prior professional experience, and you can demonstrate that. And I was listening to a podcast this morning Angela Duckworth was talking about grit, and talking about the perspective that we have when we get older. We've got that ability to do that perspective taking a lot more, so which can help us not get as rattled in business situations. It can help us be more prepared when kind of like adjustments need to be made last minute. So we've got that prior professional experience. So it's tapping into your experiences and conveying those, and how it's actually a benefit that you have those experiences. And then the next one is thought-provoking questions and insights. So there have been studies done and research showing that if you're an outsider coming in, you often have a very different perspective. And because of that perspective, you're able to ask thought-provoking questions and provide insights, and may question things that are being done because you're not so used to, just doing things the way they've always been done, because that's what it's like at this company. You may bring insight and thought-provoking questions to say, well, what if we did it a little bit differently? What if we streamlined this process? Or what if we did this? What if we did that? Like, as a returner, as somebody who's been out of paid work for a period of time, who's had varied experiences during that career pause and in your prior professional experience, or as a career transition candidate, you can bring a different perspective, and those thought-provoking questions and insight can really benefit an employer. And then finally, heart. And I know that so many of us, especially in the past year, have had lots of opportunity to practice empathy and demonstrate heart. And if you're a caregiver, that is something that we are constantly practicing, showing empathy for other people. And it's been demonstrated that empathy is a key leadership skill to be able to galvanize your team and motivate people to move forward. They have to know and believe that you know what's going on with them and where they are. And so empathy is a huge thing that I think that people who have been caregivers bring to the workplace. And then finally, Parents Pivot, because I've named my company Parents Pivot because I feel like it demonstrates the ability that so many people that I know, caregivers, parents, have to pivot. Life is constantly, when we're managing lots of other people, life is constantly throwing us curveballs, and we're able to pivot and adjust and be agile in this environment. And those skills are really key, especially today in business. So I would encourage you guys to think through this for yourselves. If you're open to it, I'd love to see if any of these or which one resonated for you. So in the chat, if you want to go ahead and write down, was it D? Was it energy? The D is the drive and determination. Was it energy? That prior professional experience? Those thought-provoking questions are heart, and you can just put D, E, P, T, or H. So any of those, which one? Awesome. I see some D's, T's, PH, PE. Love it. D and H. I love it. Yes, yes. So I love to see all of these coming through. And no matter which letter it is that resonated with you, I hope you're able to dig in a little bit more and get more specific about how you bring that value to an employer. And hopefully this is a helpful start to get you on your way to being comfortable talking about the value that you bring to an employer. All of them. Awesome. Somebody says all. So good. DEP. I love it. I love it. Wonderful. So hopefully that's something that you guys will take away from today. So I want to share a client success story. So this is from a client, and names have been changed. Eliza, I worked with Eliza as she's a stay-at-home parent with a 3-year career pause. And I worked with her over the summer. So when she came to me, she had just a lack of confidence, and she didn't know how to address that career pause. So she has background as a program manager for a college, and then she was an independent consultant for a period of time and did some of that work actually during her career pause. So she has a bachelor in English and a master's in communication. And as you can see, as you read through some of her experience, a lot of this experience was from her prior professional experience. And she has that 3-year gap, but it's still really relevant experience to what she wanted to do. And actually, when she came to me, she didn't necessarily know exactly what she wanted to do either. She didn't necessarily want to go back to doing what she was doing before, working for a college. But we worked together and we found ed tech as a related industry and something that was also booming during the pandemic. And so she was able to find a project manager role working for an ed tech company within 3 months of starting our one-to-one coaching. And I think she was able to do that because of the work that we did in helping her really confidently express her value to an employer and knowing how to address that pause and bring it up at her earliest opportunity so that she could control the narrative. So I think that was what really helped Eliza. All right, next common struggle is a lack of clarity around what you want to do for paid work. And for many of you on this call, this was a key component to one of your struggle and your return. So many times I hear that people don't want to return to what they did pause. They don't want to, they just don't know what else that they would want to do. And they don't know what skills would be beneficial for an employer in today's climate. And they might not know how to figure out what to do. So does any of that resonate with you guys in the chat? If you just say, yes, yes, that resonates, that's great. Oh, good. I see some yeses. Absolutely. Yes, 100%. Some exclamation points. Yes, in a way. Checks. Love it. Definitely. Yeah. Okay, good. So this is so common, and I know where you guys are today, and I've seen people get clear on this. So it's possible, and that's part of the work that I love doing. So what I always encourage people to do is to start with what you know. So what did you do in your past work experience? That's one question. But also, how did you choose to spend your time during your career pause? And that's really important to note because in a sense, while we are on a career pause, we've probably taken a career pause because of either a move or caretaking. So there's some responsibility that we've not necessarily had a choice in doing, but we have a choice in the way that we show up in that role as caregivers, the way that we show up and work through the moves, if that's what we've gone through, the way that we care for aging parents. So in terms of, we all have choices about how we choose to show up in that experience, in that career pause experience. So how did you choose to show up? And I just want you guys to think about that for yourselves. And if you have a piece of paper, you can write it down. And then think through from these two exercises, these two questions, think through, you have to match your interest and your skill and your passion with a need in the world. You have to be able to match what lights you up, what gets you excited with a need. Otherwise, you're not going far. So part of what we do in coaching is that matchup, is that exploration around what it is that really lights you up. We use assessments and activities and tools and all that kind of stuff. So this is a great way to get started, but there are opportunities to dig a little deeper too. All right, so this is another Thrive participant, and Thrive is my group coaching program, if I haven't explained that already. So Dana was a member of or participant in the Thrive that happened almost a year ago last summer. So she had been a stay-at-home parent for 16 years, and she found that she had a lack of clarity around what she wanted to do, around how to navigate the job search process. Talking to her later, she's like, I didn't even realize my resume was so outdated. And she also wanted accountability. She was the type of mom, she had 3 girls. She was the type of mom who was always doing things for her kids, always taking them to practices. Her girls were in high school and very athletic and all sorts of sports teams. And so she was always finding herself doing things for her family, but she wasn't making the time to do for herself. And so part of what attracted her to the Thrive program was that accountability, and that's really what she was looking for. So her past roles were as an analyst or in some major financial institutions. She had a bachelor in economics, an MBA in finance. And so there's a question in here about, can I give examples about what I mean about how we show up? And so I think that's probably referring to, how you present yourselves to an employer. So if we walk through this example of Dana, when she was talking to prospective employers, some of that was, in shaping like what she did during her career pause. So Dana was particularly active with her kids' schools. So she was a Girl Scout troop leader for 3 troops and had 15 year-long positions in volunteer roles for her children's schools. And if you see, she was out of paid work for 16 years, and she held 15 year-long position. So if you're doing the math, she had to hold some of those positions concurrently. So she was multitasking, holding several leadership positions within a year, multitasking, getting all of this stuff done. So, and what was she able to get done? She was able to quantify what she did during her career pause, and we put that on the put that on her resume and conveyed that in her LinkedIn. I can relate to Dana. Yeah, I know. I feel like a lot of people that I work with do relate to that piece of being the mom, being the parent who is always doing things for everybody else and doesn't focus necessarily on what they need and what they want. So the exciting thing about Dana was she landed a community development role at a startup focusing on fundraising opportunities for schools within 3 months of completing the Thrive program. And that was during the pandemic. So the experience that landed her the job was the fundraising experience that she had in her unpaid work as a school volunteer. Like being very comfortable around the school environment, knowing school professionals. That experience was what led her to get this job. Also, her relationship management and communication skills. So that was fun to see Dana land. And then the last two struggles that returners often face are, being overwhelmed by the job search process. A lot has changed since they were last in the job market. So, LinkedIn might not have been used the way it is used today. It might have been around. It might not have been used. Resumes have changed so much. That's a challenge. So, and also then feeling isolated in your return to work, return to paid work, feeling like you don't necessarily know what the right angle is to go. You don't know whose advice to believe. You don't know which direction you should take. So if you've asked yourself any of these questions, who should I listen to in terms of job search guidance? The last time I applied for a job, LinkedIn was not as prominent. How do I navigate the job search process? How do I talk about my gap in paid work on my resume, LinkedIn, and interviews? And my friends are either have been continuously working or they're happy staying at home. Nobody understands quite what I'm going through. And then if you enjoy learning from others and that you want to find people who are going through the same thing or who have been successful doing what you want to do in your return to paid work, and you're asking yourself, where can I find my people? So for all of these, we've talked a little bit about how to address that gap in paid work experience, and that's directly so that you can control the narrative. For some of these others, for all of these pieces, actually, the Thrive Like a Mother group coaching program addresses each of these challenges and will help you dig in and find clarity around what you want to do for paid work, navigate the job search process so that you have clarity around resumes, LinkedIn, interview prep, salary negotiation, help you build confidence in the value that you bring, and find clarity around what skills are valuable for you, all in a community of returners with similar goals who are going through similar struggles as you, and me, your professional coach, to hold you accountable and expertly guide you using my experience coaching returners. So the next Thrive program starts June 15th and continues through August. And I'm always happy to talk with anybody one-on-one who's interested in knowing more about that. So our final example of a client success story is Carla, who was a Thrive participant as well. And she had been a stay-at-home parent for 18 years. And so she felt like she had been out of paid work for so long. She said, I don't even know what I want to do. Who do I listen to? So much has changed. And she felt really isolated and alone in this process. Her previous professional experience was with Accenture as a financial analyst. She has a BBA in finance, and during her unpaid work, she held more than 18 significant leadership positions. She was hugely involved in nonprofits and her kids' schools as the gala chair, president, or treasurer, or secretary, fundraising chair for various different organizations. And then she had her prior professional experience, 5 years as a consultant, where she left as a manager. So her accomplishments we were able to pull out, and she, when we started working together, she just wasn't sure what she had accomplished. And I knew from previous experience working with returners, she must have accomplished so much. So she did. She implemented new software platforms for processing payments. And she did the research for that. She did the implementation for that. She made these changes, system changes that were going on in the nonprofit. And that's hugely translatable to the workforce, paid work. I keep saying paid work and unpaid work because as you see, so many of these people have done a lot in their unpaid work. And then she had raised more than $1 million for 2 nonprofit galas. And then she had maintained a payment and attendance database for 700 guest event. She landed an account manager role for an interior design firm 6 months after Thrive. And what they loved was that she had proactively implemented these systems in her unpaid work experience and her ability to manage relationships. And for all of you, if you've worked in any volunteer capacity, that's typically been remote work. And that is such a prized skill these days. How do you manage things remotely? And so I bet that so many of you have that remote unpaid work experience that could really translate to the paid workforce. So we're coming up to our Q&A session. I'd like to leave you guys with this quote, which is, may your choices reflect your hopes, not your fears, from Nelson Mandela. And I think this really speaks to our mindset when we're returning to paid work and focusing on what we can change, where we're headed, where we want to go, and not letting our fears hold us back. So I'm looking forward. What are your questions? I wonder whether Danielle will come up. There you go. I can't
There we go. Unmute. There we go. Yes, the unmute. Thank you so much, Anna. So much information.
Yeah.
Let's start with a couple of questions that came in beforehand from people when they registered. And a question that was asked a couple of times is, how do I get through an HR ATS screen when the gap in work time? And I don't know what an ATS screen is. So maybe you could explain that first and then maybe answer the question.
Yes, that's an excellent question. And it shows that there's a real challenge. So an ATS system is an applicant tracking system, and it's an automated system used by Human Resources Department to screen candidates. And the challenge with that oftentimes is that ATS systems typically screen out if you don't have any experience in the past 3 years. And so if you have a career pause, that is important to know because you need to have something in that past 3-year experience timeframe. So I always recommend that people put their unpaid work experience right up there at the top of their resume to showcase what they've been doing. That relates to the job that they want to do. Great question.
Okay. Yeah, great advice too. So we also got a lot of questions ahead of time from people who've taken a pause, but it wasn't for children, right? So it was for health issues, or it was for an elderly parent, or it looks like quite a variety of reasons that people do have these pauses in their careers. And what are some ways to kind of overcome that when maybe you didn't have all this school volunteer activity to highlight? What could you do in those cases?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think that this happens a lot. So we're take a pause for moves, or for caring for our own health needs, or for aging parents. And I know that there are things that you've experienced during that process that that you've learned along the way. Like I know, I've worked with a client who was caring for an elderly parent, and that was why she took took a career pause. And as part of that process, she was trying to find a nursing home for her father. And so she had to do a lot of research around where she wanted her father to end up. And so there's research done as part of that. And there's skills that she utilized in managing that process, the logistics and operational side of that you could convey. And then the other point is like, I think that there's a real power in the pause that you don't necessarily have if you're continuously working. If you have a career pause, you're at a point in your life where trying to figure out what you want to do next. And you have the opportunity to really reflect on what that is and to reflect on what's meaningful for you so that you can go forward and pick the best opportunity for you in your next career. Oftentimes people, if we're continuously working, we feel like we don't have any chance to change. We just got to do what we've always been doing. I feel like there's a little bit more freedom if you've had a career pause to be able to reflect on what's best for you and what will work best for you in the future. So I think really taking advantage of that time and that space and figuring out for yourself what's important. So yeah.
Great. And then we also got several questions ahead of time on technical careers, right? So if somebody's in a technical space and they feel like in their pause that technology has maybe outpaced them, or how maybe they've kept up with it, but there aren't certifications in place. How do you, if you are going back into that technical space, whether it be, I just off the top of my head, I'm thinking engineering, banking, finance, all of those different spaces, how do you go into that position and demonstrate that your technical capabilities are still up to par?
Yes. And so there are so many industries where things have changed so much in the past 3 years, 5 years. You mentioned engineering. I think there are some other technical spaces where there's a lot that's changed in the past year. For those of you who are familiar with the workplace, companies current employees are feeling like they need to be upskilled. So people who are continuously working feel like they need to be upskilled. So this is a real challenge in the workforce today. So I would say that not necessarily just because you've been continuously working, are you up to date on the most recent skills, that there are workers who are continuously working that still need those upskilling. And so I would dig in to understand for your opportunity, for your area of interest, what are the key skills that you need to focus on? There are all sorts of certification programs that you can take that are kind of that are smaller courses, some are longer, where you can get an idea about the process, about the system used. There's so many systems out there, depending on what you're looking at. Like, a lot of my clients want to return to work in marketing, and digital marketing and social media is something that's hugely changed in the past year. So if you're looking to go back into that, I would definitely demonstrate through certifications or project work. If you can do some project work for a family friend, or as a consultant, managing somebody's digital media and showcasing that Google Analytics and SEO, all those kind of like key buzzwords that are important for marketing. That you have to, I guess, figure out what those are. And that's by doing your research on, interviewing people who are in the field and understanding what they think is really important for people to going into that field to understand. And then it's about like looking for a certification, or you may not necessarily need a certification. You may need that kind of project-based experience. So looking for opportunities for you to do that as well.
Great.
Yeah.
And then a couple of questions that have come in since your presentation started. Let's look at, somebody asked for examples on how to show up. You mentioned showing up. How can they do that specifically?
Yeah. So for example, examples for showing up. So let's talk about, one of my clients who was not feeling so confident and didn't know how to present her pause. So through coaching, we really worked on confidently talking about that, confidently reflecting
Oh,
translate to the workplace. And we practiced communicating that. So by showing up, I mean how you present yourself to a potential employer, or how you present yourself even to friends and family as you're talking about returning to paid work, because your network is a huge source of opportunity when it comes to landing your next job. And so the way that you show up with friends and family, the way that you talk about returning to work, if you are, if you're excited about it and you're focused on, being able to use your professional skills again, you're excited about, you've been reading up on the industry and what's been going on, and you're excited to be part of that again. I think conveying that passion, excitement, along with some evidence of research in the industry is all part of how you show up to your friends and family, to employers in this return to paid work journey.
wow. I know early in my
Yeah.
career, somebody suggested to eliminate the word just from your conversations with people. And because you would say, well, I'm just this, or I'm just that, and it minimizes your position. So that's interesting. So it's still out there. That's still happening, right? Okay,
Yes, I
so
love that you bring that up, because Danielle, I just want to make a point on, because it is important. The way that we talk conveys whether we're confident or not, and using words like just really convey that we're not confident and we're not sure. So that's a great tip for making just a slight change in our language.
words matter, right? So,
Do.
so how important is LinkedIn? There are people who've commented that they don't want a LinkedIn profile. And I just, in my own experience, I feel like if you have a very common name, it doesn't matter if you have a LinkedIn profile because I can't find you anyway. But if you have a standout name, it seems to be a little more critical.
I know. Well, that's the thing. We always think that so many people are going to be watching us when we land on LinkedIn. But the reality is that there are so many people on LinkedIn. People, unless you're constantly putting out yourself out there, that's really part of your job, a lot of people are not going to get noticed, and that's a problem in your job search when you are looking to build your network to get noticed as a job seeker. It really, LinkedIn is so important for networking, for building your network, for connecting with people that you know already, professionally, personally, as friends, so that they can, it's kind of like an announcement to the world that, like, I am ready to do this. But I cannot tell you how many people that I talk to, how many returners that are like, I'm just so fearful of putting myself out there like that. And I personally was fearful of putting myself out on LinkedIn when I first started my coaching business, but I knew I needed to. And I was so worried about what everybody was going to think. And I got, especially when I was announcing Parents Pivot, I was worried about, what everybody was going to think. And I got zero comments when I announced about Parents Pivot, negative comments, zero negative comments. I got so many comments from people who I hadn't talked to in 10 years, who I'd connected with from my previous professional life as an accountant, who were like, this is awesome. I love what you're doing. So I'd say for the most part, those kind of like fears of, oh, everybody's looking at me. It's not necessarily true. It's hard to be found on LinkedIn. You've got to show up to be able to build your network and to be found in the job search process. And the critical eye, I'd say that for the most part, my experience has been that people have been really supportive, not necessarily critical. But those are fears that we can work on in coaching, and that's definitely common. So yeah, I think that they've put my link to my LinkedIn and a way to sign up for a 30-minute exploratory call, which I'm happy to have with anybody who's interested in understanding how coaching and the Thrive Group coaching program or one-on-one could help them in their career transition or return to paid work. So
well, let's do one more question
okay.
in our last couple of minutes. We've had a couple of things come in about that position that you're going back to, right? So you've had this pause for whatever reason, and maybe you left the workforce at a certain salary level and title level, and now you're moving back in. How do you benchmark yourself against someone who would have maybe stayed in the workforce continuously and been at a certain salary level, a certain title area, space, and then where do you put yourself in that spectrum?
Yeah. So I think the question is around how do you decide where you should enter the workforce, at what level, and then how do you figure out what salary is best for you? And I think all of that depends on so many different factors. So it's really unique to you. It depends on what industry you're returning to and how much that's changed since you were in that last position. It depends on your experience that you've had during your career pause. It depends on the length of your career pause. It depends on so many different things. So it's really, and then there's lots of resources that we talk about in coaching and in the Thrive program where you can research salary levels and that kind of thing. So I'd say it really depends on who you are, what industry, and then there's definitely ways to get clear on what would be an appropriate salary. So yeah.
Okay. I know those are hard things for people who are still in the, continuously working. I can imagine it must be even harder to try and figure out your spot.
Yes.
Okay, Anna, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody. We really appreciate the questions that you submitted and the participation today and the information that Anna shared. And as she mentioned, her information is in the chat box if you want to go ahead and grab that before we close out. The LinkedIn link, and then also I think these one-on-ones are complimentary that you do, Anna. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm
to meet with
happy
people.
to have a 30-minute exploratory call with anybody who's interested, for free, to learn about how coaching can support them. Because I know it's a challenging time, and you do not have to go through it alone.
Okay. And you work with people around the country?
I do. Yes. So I'm nationwide. The last Thrive group, there were people from the Bay Area and San Francisco. There were people from the East Coast. There were people from Houston, Chicago. We got you covered.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Anna. And thank you for participating in today's event. We all, I'm sure, look really forward to seeing you again at future programs. And I encourage everybody who participated today to check out Parents Pivot for more information. Like I said, the link in the chat box, and stay tuned for upcoming events sponsored by the Washington University Alumni Association. There are an amazing number of programs out there for all kinds of different topics that WashU is putting on. They really have knocked it out of the ballpark during this pivot that they've had to do during COVID. Thank you, everybody, so much, and we'll see you at the next event.
I wanted to make one more question, or to make one more point. Somebody in the chat just said, how big are the Thrive groups? They're small. I keep them intentionally small. They're 10 people max, so that you're able to get all your questions answered and do. It's a 3-month program too, so you really have a long time to work through these challenges. So just wanted to make that point. But yes, thank you so much for having us, WashU. It's great to connect with other alumni like you, Danielle, and everybody on the call. And thank you so much.